Well, Josh, it's October.
Sure it is.
It's time to start watching some spooky movies, or continue to watch spooky movies.
However you want to do.
But it's time to break out this guy.
Yes.
It's been a year, make sure he still works. All right, see you next year.
Okay.
So in honor of our discussion of The Exorcist, I went in search of split pea soup. This was the only can and the only brand I could find of split pea soup.
That looks like a hearty split pea.
It's got ham in it.
Yeah, wow. I mean, good for, a good salty tastiness, but not so good for vomiting onto Jason Miller.
Do you want it?
No, I hate split pea.
Maybe I'll give it to a trick-or-treater.
Oh, there you go.
Put it in their bag.
I got a rock.
So I mentioned to you doing The Exorcist for the spooky Halloween season. It's my favorite horror film.
Okay.
It's one of my favorite movies in general.
Sure.
And you had slight reservations where you're like, what else is there to say about The Exorcist?
There's just been so much. There's been so much discussion about it. There's been movies and books and
Parodies.
oh god, the parodies.
The power of Christ compels you! Let's suck you. Let me suck you. Your mama eats kitty litter. Don't nobody talk about my mama. Fuck this.
Which is why my idea was to spice up this review in case we start to get repetitive or say things that people have heard before. Just occasionally throughout this video, I'm just going to cut the clips from Repossessed, starring Linda Blair and Leslie Nielsen. Just sprinkle them in.
Sure.
Kind of like in the re-release of The Exorcist when William Friedkin just dropped in those Pazuzu faces. Just when you least expect it. Here's a clip from Repossessed.
Oh boy.
I'll only show the funny clips, so that'll severely limit what I have to show.
Oh.
One more word out of you little sacks of shit, and there'll be no more TV for you tonight!
In addition, well, first of all, they call it the extended director's cut. It's not a director's cut.
Was that the version you've never seen?
When it was released in theaters in 2000 or 2001, it was called the version you've never seen, which is very, I don't know, showmanshipy. It's very catchy, but it's not even a director's cut. If anything, it should be called the writer's cut.
Yeah, because the director's cut is the theatrical version.
Yeah, the version you've never seen is William Peter Blatty being like, put this stuff back in, please.
Yeah.
He took out these things that I think are important to the film.
Some of the things I think, like the spider walk.
Spider Walk's fun. The interesting thing about the Spider Walk is that, it wasn't in the original film, so it wasn't in the movie for 25 years. They re-released the movie, and that's in there, and that is an iconic scene in its own right now. When people talk about this movie, they talk about the Spider Walk.
I guess so. Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, for me, it was it's okay. It's not a mind-blowing thing. I think the most important thing that got put back is the discussion between Jason Miller and Max von Sydow on the stairs.
Why this girl doesn't make sense.
I think the point is to make us despair, to reject the possibility that God could love us.
I like that scene. I also like the theatrical cut where they're just sitting there and they're exhausted and then it cuts away.
I think they're both worthwhile, and I think that the reasoning is not either, because Blatty's reasoning is that gives the audience forgiveness to enjoy some of the more brutal things, and you don't have to give them forgiveness. It's fine.
Well, that's I think the key to this movie is that relationship between William Friedkin and William Peter Blatty.
Yeah.
Because if you watch, there's, again, I'm going to just say that this Blu-ray, this particular release, is a testament to the importance of still having physical media. There is so much to dig through on this. And for a movie made in 1973, there's so much behind-the-scenes footage.
But what luck that the DP just was shooting 16 millimeter behind the scenes just all the time.
Yeah, but I love, there's interviews with them on this, the two of them at a round table. And they have the relationship of an old married couple.
Yes.
The way they bicker is so fun to watch.
I know. Well, the problem is the audience, as I long suspected, I know, Bill, and what we should try to do on the re-release is have the audience pass by you. No.
But like I said, that's the key to making the movie work, is that William Peter Blatty comes from a religious background. He wanted the book to be the book that the film is based on, that he also wrote the screenplay for. He wanted it to be grounded and respectful of Jesuit priests and religion and all that stuff. And I don't think William Friedkin gives a crap about that.
No, he just wants to shoot it as realistically as possible.
Yes, so I think those two perspectives together, it's like lightning in a bottle. It's one of those, like we've talked about, like Ghostbusters or something, a movie where you have the right people working at the right time on the right project. And it's The Exorcist, in my mind, is one of those movies that I would call a perfect movie.
Yeah, absolutely. In either version, honestly.
Yeah, the only thing I don't like in the version you've never seen, or the director's cut, or whatever you want to call it, are the subliminal faces.
I don't like those either.
Because one, they're not subliminal. Two, they look silly. They look like they were slapped on there in 5 seconds. And there's a couple, like, there's one part where Linda Blair's face, like, digitally turns demonic for a second, and little things like that. Like, get that shit out of here.
Like, that sucks, but it was better. It was nice that they were able to use the tech to make the cut with Jason Miller at the end.
Yeah, it's fluid. A little seamless. Yeah,
that makes sense.
As opposed to just a hard cut.
But we can talk about everything that's in this movie is practical.
Yeah,
and that's amazing.
And that's I really think there's a moment in the movie when they go into Linda Blair's room and there's shit just flying around the room. It's like records and sheets and furniture is moving, and it's all really there. And you contrast that with something like, it's a few years later, but like Poltergeist. There's a sequence where shit's flying around the room, and it's like clearly optical.
Yeah.
There's like that hard matte optical, line around the things that are composited in.
Yeah.
And I think, William Friedkin comes from a documentary background. He did The French Connection before this. A lot of the best horror films ever made are made by people that weren't primarily known for horror.
Yeah.
You have like Ridley Scott doing Alien, Stanley Kubrick doing The Shining, and I think and then William Friedkin doing this, and it's like, I don't know, they come at it from a different perspective.
Well, I think this one in particular was the awareness of Blatty from the go, was like he wanted somebody that had a documentary eye.
Yeah.
And so specifically sought out Friedkin because he knew that he could make it could take this fantastical idea to most people and make it appear flat and real, basically, because it's really not. It's shot fairly flat and just normal.
Right. It feels it's not shot like a documentary, but it feels like a documentary.
Yeah.
It feels very like fly on the wall, especially when you get to the hospital stuff, which is. When people say this movie's not shocking or scary anymore, all the stuff with them doing tests on Reagan to try and figure out what the fuck is wrong with her is the most chilling stuff in the movie, and it's all just shot so matter-of-factly.
Yeah, it's almost like some of the contemporary sci-fi body horror kind of stuff, like Coma. There's a lot of that in the 70s, where it's like 70s medical drama, but it's all shot super flat, super real.
Yeah.
And that kind of, I feel like that's kind of the same thing, but even more real, because again, Friedkin being the documentary guy wants to shoot it as real as possible.
It's not a film about Dracula. It's not a film about the alien. It's about a real street in a real town. And upstairs on the 3rd floor of this house is a real little girl who happens to be possessed by a demon.
So it's so flat, matter of fact, and it's terrifying because that's where medical science was in the 70s.
Right. But I think it's been interesting to see the kind of perception of the movie shift over time, because the big thing, it's almost like the movie's a victim of its own notoriety, where for the longest time, people just called it the scariest movie ever made, the scariest movie ever made.
Well,
to the point where someone watching it now, let's see how scary this is. It's not that it's the scariest movie ever made if you're looking for a scary horror movie. It's scary in how grounded and real the whole thing is.
I didn't see it initially until I was in my 20s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because again, it had this reputation of being so scary.
Yeah.
Like, oh my. So it was there were two movies. It was that and Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Okay.
That I was like, okay, so it's going to be like a sunny Saturday afternoon. And I'm going to watch this, so this doesn't fuck with me. And both of them have a certain reputation as well in terms of being very realistic. Texas Chainsaw Massacre still holds up that way, where it's just like there's a bunch of crazy people that made this fucking movie.
Yeah, it feels like it was made by crazy. It feels like it was made by the family that's in the movie.
Yes, and The Exorcist feels like a documentary, but even still, it was like it was presented in such a way that it was just like, here are the events. You know, Blatty had heard this in college. He was just like, that sounds like a good story.
Yeah, it was based on a true story of a kid that was supposedly possessed. I think in Baltimore, somewhere nearby.
Somewhere nearby. Yeah, you get the sense, obviously, from Blatty that he believes in it.
Yeah,
but you get the sense that Freegan, who doesn't give a shit about any of the supernatural, religious, any of it, he buys it.
To me, that's what makes the movie scary, because there's three complaints that people have about this movie. One, it's boring, which we'll get into. Two, it's not scary, which is subjective. And three, if you're not religious, that's the reason it's not scary. I am not a religious person.
Nor am I.
What makes the movie scary to me is the fact that the Chris McNeil character, the mom, is also not religious.
Yeah.
And the methodical process the movie goes through of showing her taking every avenue to try and figure out what's wrong with her daughter. Like we mentioned, the medical stuff. Is it a physical thing? Is it a mental illness
Psychological?
Did you see her or not? She's acting like she's fucking out of her mind, psychotic, like a split personality or...
She thinks her daughter's losing her mind, which is making her losing her mind. And out of sheer desperation, she turns to priests about looking into getting an exorcism. And even at that point, the priest tries to talk her out of it.
Yeah.
Which leads to one of my favorite scenes from an acting perspective with Ellen Burstyn.
She's already seen every fucking psychiatrist in the world, and they sent me to you. Now you're gonna send me back to them? Jesus Christ, won't somebody help me?
You don't understand. Your daughter...
God, can't you help her? Just help her!
There's nothing scarier than having a family member or yourself have something wrong and no one can tell you what it is.
Yes, and that's the brilliance of Ellen Burstyn's performance,
Yeah.
because she's just so beat down by it. God. And also, adding to that, having Ellen Burstyn's character be an actress, and having the fact that they're living in this house that isn't their own house, they're away from home, they're staying in this house in Georgetown while she's filming this movie. One of my biggest fears is something going wrong, getting sick or something when I'm like out of town.
Yeah.
When I'm away from everything I'm comfortable with. And so I think the movie plays into that too.
Definitely.
Where it's like, it's a very nice house, like it's a very comfy house that they're staying in.
But it's still a strange place.
It's still a place they're not as familiar with. And on top of that, the burden of being a famous actress. There's like the scene with Kinderman when he comes over to talk to her, and then he's like, can I get an autograph? And she's so like, frustrated and emotionally torn from what her daughter is going through. And then it's like she still has to put up that front of signing autographs on top of that.
I think that is something interesting too, whereas one of the big scenes in the movie, one of the big, I guess, Act 1 kind of turning scene is the whole masturbation with the crucifix scene.
Yes.
Lick me!
Blatty was specifically trying to figure out what can take this woman who doesn't believe in any of this and push her over that edge. It's not gratuitous at all. It's meant to take you to that same place.
Yeah. When you talk about like the movie was so shocking when it came out, and there's so many things that feel so tame now.
Yeah.
Because the movie's almost 50 years old, and we've seen so much since then. But that moment is still, just because it's like a little girl, and the fact that it's not shown in the movie, but I know their justification for the way her face is all fucked up is that, she was using that crucifix to scratch her face up.
It's not scary, fine, but it's shocking.
I think it's scary.
I don't think it's that scary, but it's still just like, ooh, whoa. It's something that if you experienced in real life, you would have no idea how to deal with it.
Yeah. And that's why I love Ellen Burstyn in this movie so much, because that's why it's scary to me, is because I'm kind of looking at it through her perspective.
Sure.
And then this voice coming out, this like other voice, like that's not my daughter anymore.
That is scary. And the way that they build that stuff up too, where like the disassociation of Regan from the body.
Yeah.
You know, initially where it's just like, something's wrong. I've been playing with this Ouija board.
Captain Howdy said no.
Oh. Captain Howdy, I see.
Nice.
And there's Captain Howdy, which of course we all know from the famous Twisted Sister album.
Is that on a Twisted Sister album?
Yeah.
Because I know Dee Snider made a movie called Strangeland, where his character is named Captain Howdy.
How about I come over there and beat the dog shit out of you?
Yeah, like.
Have you ever seen that movie?
No.
It is the most hilariously dated early 2000s. He's like going into AOL chat rooms to try and lure in teenagers.
You like hip hop. Oh, love it.
His first victim is Linda Cardellini.
Oh my God.
From Freaks and Geeks.
Holy shit.
It's something.
But yeah, like 15 years before that, there's a song on the same album as We're Not Gonna Take It. And,
really?
And all that. It's about, you should stay away from Captain Howdy.
Wow.
Yeah.
He was really living with that character.
He really was, and that's how I knew it. So like when I got to the movie, fucking 15 years after I heard that song, I was like,
Yeah. Well, that's how I was with this whole movie, because I saw Repossessed before I saw The Exorcist. Because I liked Leslie Nielsen.
Oh, sure. Who didn't grow up being a Naked Gun fan?
Yeah. But then I saw Exorcist a few years after watching that, and I was like, oh!
So, how do you like it?
Linda Blair, any shot of Linda Blair throughout like the second half of this movie, to me is like the complete distillation of what horror is. It's just that complete corruption of innocence.
Yes, just even the idea that like she's not there. She's in there.
Yeah.
With them, but there's just the little flashes of when she actually comes through. But that even of itself, and the switching of the perspectives, and the way that the demon Pazuzu, as we find out later.
He is Pazuzu.
He is Pazuzu.
This isn't, some people think this movie is about Linda Blair being possessed by the devil himself.
Oh, and they talk about that.
Yeah.
And I'm the devil. Now kindly undo these straps.
Look, your daughter doesn't say she's a demon. She says she's the devil himself. Now, if you've seen as many psychotics as I have, you'd realize that's the same thing as saying you're Napoleon Bonaparte.
They don't say the name Pazuzu because they were smart.
Yeah.
They fucked that up in Exorcist too. Don't say the name Pazuzu.
I am Pazuzu.
It's constantly playing games.
Yeah.
With the priests.
Right. Well, and the fact that there's probably more than one demon in there.
Right.
Comes out in different voices, and that's something they play up in Exorcist 3. Which we'll get to.
But there's that in the scene with the tape recorder. He's listening to the voices, and they're arguing with each other.
Yeah.
And that's a fascinating idea in and of itself. Just kind of the turmoil within her, not being just one specific demon, being all these different things that have gotten through the Ouija board or whatever.
But I like the idea that everything is so, like, the Ouija board is never, it's never like solidified that that's what caused any of this. It's just the thing she's playing with.
Yeah.
Maybe it did, maybe it didn't.
Might stop you from doing it.
But like that, and there's so many things that you don't see in the movie, like Burt Dennings, the drunk director, that we don't see his death.
Burt Dennings, good father, was found at the bottom of those steps leading to M Street with his head turned completely around, facing backwards.
Even remove the supernatural elements. I don't know how you cannot be affected by the story of this mother and what she's going through.
Absolutely, and the way that the dread is built up to the point where it's just like, something's wrong, something's really wrong.
Yeah.
Oh shit! Like, and just the way that builds is so well done. I can't imagine how you'd find that boring.
And if I did have a criticism of the movie, it would be that the last act is the exorcism, and Chris McNeil kind of takes a back seat for pretty much the entire third act. Because for me, again, as someone that's not religious, that is scared because I'm with this character who also doesn't believe these things, but they're happening. It's like George Clooney in From Dusk Till Dawn.
I don't want to hear anything about I don't believe in vampires. Because I don't fucking believe in vampires. But I believe in my own two eyes. And what I saw is fucking vampires.
Yeah, and I think that, I agree with you, but I also can see how it would be hard to wedge another person into that three-person dynamic.
Yeah.
Like
Oh,
it's
yeah.
really,
It works narratively.
Yeah. Well, and she's the catalyst for this exorcism to happen, essentially.
Yeah.
She gets it to happen, so now it happens.
Yeah.
So her role is kind of done-ish at that point.
Let them take over and do what they got to do.
Yeah. And we can talk about the old age makeup on Max von Sydow is possibly the best ever because it just looks like he looks now.
That's the craziest thing. When I first saw this movie, I didn't know who Max von Sydow was. I just thought it was an old guy.
Yeah.
And then you see him in like The Force Awakens. That's what he looks like now.
It's amazing.
It's crazy, and like the fact that the makeup still holds up.
Yeah, and in the bright Iraqi sunlight,
Yeah.
it looks perfect.
Yeah.
You know, it's like that's all kudos to Dick Smith on that one. But from going from both extremes to the subtlety of Max von Sydow,
Yeah.
to Linda Blair and all the appliances and everything they did, and that's another great thing about the documentaries here is they show some of the older, like we tried this and like, oh, that would have been terrible.
It looks like an Evil Dead hag or something. Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's the Wicked Witch. Like, yeah, that's not the demon. Yeah, but then the way he worked with Friedkin, and they talked about the scars and everything,
Yeah.
and how those develop as the movie goes on.
Yeah. Like her face does not alter in the movie aside from the lacerations.
But it all feels like the rest of it could be coming from the inside and pushing out.
Yeah.
And that's the way to do it. You know, and that's a brilliant, very simple, like everybody talks about the pea soup. We were talking about it earlier. And that is just a literal, just like we put a tube in her face and then it goes out.
Okay, kids, dinner's almost ready. Turn off the TV.
What are we having?
Oh, your favorite. Prime rib, sweet potatoes, green beans, and split pea soup.
You don't necessarily think about that when you're watching the movie.
Yeah.
You think about it when you're watching the documentaries and her talking about it. But
Yes.
you never think about it during the movie. She's acting through all that.
Yes.
And when you think about that, it's amazing.
And you completely buy it.
Yeah.
The whole and that's the physicality of not just that, but again talking about the practical effects. Like there's a part where they have her like this like girdle thing around her, and so they can shoot her up and down in the bed.
Mother, please! Please,
What's happening?
stop! It's burning! It's burning!
Do something, Doctor. Please help her.
And the lacing came loose. And so as I went forward, the piece was coming back.
She started screaming.
And that kind of leads into some things I don't know how I feel about. William Friedkin is like a crazy person.
Yeah.
And you hear the stories. There's the Fear of God documentary that's on here, which is like, at this point, it's like 25 years old or something.
It was Mark Kermode, BBC.
The Mark Kermode, the critic, made it. And you hear these stories of like the actor that plays Father Dyer talking about Friedkin slapping him across the face.
He belted me right across the chops and backed off. And I went in the scene, and if you look at that carefully, when I'm giving the last right, my hand's going like that. And I wasn't making my hand go like that. That was sheer nerve juice.
The thing that kills me about that is if you read Friedkin's book, that's an old trick of his.
Oh yeah, that was a standard thing.
Yeah, he was
shooting guns on set. You do that.
But yeah, I mean, I can see like the slap. I can see makes sense. I can, it starts to get exploitative when you talk about like how the stuntman really wrenched Ellen Burstyn back.
Yeah,
and
she was on a rig with a rope that was supposed to pull her towards the wall. Yeah,
and like, don't pull me that hard. And so they pull her twice as hard.
Yeah,
and then the camera fucking goes in, just like that feels kind of exploitative.
When you hear stories like that, it's like obviously, and even in like it's like the documentary, they're kind of like laughing about it.
Yeah,
like the guy that had to pull the cable is like, and I let her have it.
And he said, "Give it to her this time." And I said, "Really?"
I couldn't stand that he was willing to just get a quick shot of it before they called the ambulance,
And you just think about like even since the documentary was made, which was 25 years after the movie was made, compared to now and how like perceptions have shifted on behavior like that.
Yeah.
And it's just like, man, the early 70s.
Seriously, like put Scarlett Johansson in a rig like that and pull her back so she thinks she's broken her fucking butt bone.
That director would be fired the next day.
Gone. And I wonder how much of it is part of the artourism of the 70s, where it's just like, now it's like, let a fucking actor act.
That was Friedkin though, he was a maniac. And this is from the era where a filmmaker made a movie.
Yeah.
And there wasn't all, like a studio had to approve it, of course, because this is a studio movie. But once he's on set, once they're making the movie, they're kind of left alone.
Yeah, well, in The French Connection, he's on camera, he's running the camera in the fucking car. There's no permits. There's just like, endanger thousands of people. Go.
Yeah.
All right. Cool, I won an Oscar. What else can I do to actors?
And those stairs, we got to talk about the stairs.
Oh, the stairs.
I just visited those stairs in real life. It's one of those places I'd always wanted to go. And they're legitimately terrifying, even in real life. Like, they're so steep, and there's something off about them. Like, they're too shallow or too narrow or something. I walked down them, and they're very scary.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing that seems like designed for you to fall.
Well, that's the cool thing, too, is like William Peter Blatty, he conceived of this story in Georgetown. He wrote the book with Georgetown in mind. The movie was made in Georgetown because, again, this is when a filmmaker made a film. It wasn't like, well, we got to shoot it here because there's better tax breaks. You know? We were going to shoot in Georgetown on these steps that I'm assuming Blatty had in mind when he came up with the entire idea.
Yeah, because he talks about hanging out with the Jesuit priests like right around in that same area.
Yeah.
It's like obviously he's got those in mind.
They built an add-on to the house.
So it would be closer to the
So it would be
stairs?
closer to the steps. So at the end of the movie when Karras jumps out the window. Although really with like movie trickery, you didn't necessarily need to do that. And it's funny because then I think about like in Exorcist 2, they have that house again and they're like, oh fuck, we got to build that addition again. And then you get to the third movie, there's one shot of that house in the third movie. It's just on the side of the frame. And they didn't bother with it that time.
Remember, it fell apart in Exorcist 2. It just all fell down.
So that's what happened.
It's not even there anymore.
I always just assume Exorcist 2 didn't happen.
Well, that's fine.
It was a fever dream of James Earl Jones.
I dreamed I was a leopard.
I dreamed I was a locust.
I was on Sesame Street. It's crazy, man.
6, 7.
And then the opening scene is in Iraq, and it's like, we're going to film it in Iraq.
Yeah.
We're not just going to go to some desert.
We're gonna film it in Vancouver. Like, no.
No, we're filming it in Iraq, and I like the stipulation that in order to film there, they had to hire a lot of Iraqi crew members.
Oh, right, and then it taught them how to make films.
It taught them how to make films,
Hollywood.
and specifically, they wanted to learn how to make fake blood. So Friedkin's like, all right, we can do that.
Sure. And one of the things that it still actually does seem comical to me just because of the way the statue is of Pazuzu in the beginning. It's just like, hey. But because it's the head, it's the face first off, because he's doing the connection from the small thing he's found to and then just zooms out to the like, hey.
Hello. I love that. It's like a shot from an old Western where he's standing there and the statue is on the other side.
The face off.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, this is foreboding and this is going to come back. And the movie never spells out, like, that statue, that's a statue of the demon that is going to possess the girl.
Right.
Like, none of that is really stated in the movie specifically. But it just completely sets up the mood of the whole thing. Shows that Father Marin is. I love the idea that he's not only a priest, but like a world's traveler and adventurer. He's like an Indiana Jones, but a priest.
I guess it's the same thing that I feel like it's the same thing that happens in Exorcist 2, where
they go into that a little
Richard
bit.
Bertrand is out searching throughout, trying to find this demon and this thing here and there. I feel like that's kind of the same staff.
Yeah.
That a
little bit of a connection there.
It was horrible. Utterly horrible.
And then the fourth movie, the prequel, that's what it's all about. Both versions.
I'm never bothered with those. I don't know if I should.
They're not. Neither one is worth it. It is interesting though when you look at like this series of movies. Like the first one, classic movie, huge success, and then every movie after that is famous for having either extensive re-edits or reshoots.
Right.
Because the second movie, seems to me like it's got to be unprecedented that the second movie played in theaters for a week. John Borman pulled it from theaters to re-edit it and then put it back in theaters.
Like, that's a Kubrick move.
That's so bizarre.
Except that Kubrick did it on his own,
not
because the movie was bad. He was like, this whole thing with the tennis ball. Nah, I don't.
Yeah.
Forget that.
And then Exorcist 3, which we'll get to, they had reshoots with that where they're like, it's an Exorcist movie. You got to put an exorcism in it, so they reshot the ending for that. And then the fourth movie, Paul Schrader wrote and directed it. Studio said, this is boring. They reshot 95% of the movie with a different director.
Was it Rennie Harlan?
Rennie Harlan did the reshoot stuff. And then they released that movie, and nobody liked it.
Like, this one sucks too.
So then they released the original version. So there's 2 Exorcist 4s, which are also both prequels. It's very bizarre.
was so scared the bed was shaking and like her back. She's going up and down. And when her voice changed, oh my God, I've never seen anything like it.
I don't like it. I want to go home.
Makes my heart beat too fast. The doctors came in and I guess it was when she was talking the devil's voice.
Well, and what's interesting in general is that, and I've been recently listening to, there's a podcast called You're Wrong About that I listened to recently, and one of their, it's basically like a debunking episode, or a debunking podcast. But it's like, here's, we did some research, let's tell you about this. So one of the recent episodes was on exorcism, and how up to The Exorcist, it had basically been kind of a forgotten thing. It's just like, yeah, that's something we used to do. I mean...
Well, they mentioned that in the movie.
Well, it just doesn't happen anymore, Miss McNeil.
Oh, yeah, since when?
Well, since we learned about mental illness, paranoia, schizophrenia.
I thought you were supposed to be an expert.
There are no experts. You probably know as much about possession as most priests.
And then once The Exorcist came out, you had people lining up, people that were not even Catholic, people that were not even religious, were just like, my person needs an exorcism, because they had basically been shown another way and been shown this thing where it's just like, okay, you need to do all this psychological work and do this and that and the other thing, or you can have an exorcism and everything's going to be better. Oh, I want that one. That one's way faster.
Yeah.
And it just brought exorcism back into the social knowledge. Yeah. So something that made it way more common again than it had been. And then it started popping up, and there were all sorts of rip-off movies of The Exorcists.
We gotta talk about those.
Before we even get to the parodies, there were the straight rip-offs. Yeah. Like there was Beyond the Door.
Which I actually kind of like that one. It's not good, and it has a different perspective in that it's a mom that's possessed. And she has like 2 kids. It's like, oh, okay, that's a different angle.
And that was Italian, right?
Yeah, that's an Italian movie.
And then perhaps most infamously, William Girdler made the blaxploitation Exorcist called Abby.
Which is apparently like the exact same movie. I still haven't seen it.
Apparently it's so close that he straight up admitted, like, yeah, we were trying to rip off that one. To the point where now Warner Brothers owns it.
It got pulled from theaters, right? Because Warner Brothers was like, hey, you can't do this.
You just made our movie again.
I fainted like 10 minutes after the first beginning of the movie. And I walked out and they gave me some water.
I passed out in about the first half hour, yeah.
It doesn't make me want to get sick like everybody says. My legs are just going, nyeh.
The manager of the National Theater in Westwood says that there indeed are at least a dozen people who faint or become ill during every showing.
But yeah, the idea that a movie like that, a movie that audiences like now think is boring and not scary, the fact that it had the kind of reaction that it did.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of anything like post Blair Witch.
Yeah, that's the last one I think that had that kind of like cultural significance to it on that large of a scale.
Yeah.
And Blair Witch also had lots of parodies.
It certainly did.
Well, that was an easy one to parody because you could do it so cheaply.
Yeah.
Just get a camcorder and go out into the woods.
Take that, Jim Wynorski.
Oh, God.
Run with it.
The Bear Wench Project. That's the thing. Is there a parody of The Exorcist called The Sexorcist? There has to be, right?
There must be, right? One of the other iconic things about the movie that we talked about a little bit previously is the score. And it's very, the big thing is tubular bells.
Which I think is a misconception. People hear that and they call it like the Exorcist theme.
Yeah, it's so strongly associated with The Exorcist.
Which is weird because it's used once in the movie in a sequence that isn't a scary scene at all.
Yeah.
It's Ellen Burstyn walking home after work.
I think it's got to be the trailers, because it's in all the trailers. The trailers were unique. And
Wasn't one of them banned?
Yeah. Because of the flashing.
Yeah.
And that was actually like
face.
triggering some epilepsy and things like that. Like legitimately actually causing problems. But they are very unique and very very frightening. Like a lot more scary than a lot of the movie is. Yeah. Because you're just seeing these flashes of terrifying things. And the music is Tubular Bells is playing while that's going on. So I think that's what really cemented the connection of it. And that's such a small part of Tubular Bells too, which is a full-length album that Mike Oldfield, this crazy, obsessive guy, like put together by himself.
The story of this album is fascinating.
And if you really want to do a deep dive on Tubular Bells, we don't have time because there's so much. It's a crazy.
It's like a weirdo perfectionist because he recorded it on like a 4-track, right? And there's like layers and layers and layers of instruments. And so he would record 4 instruments on this 4-track recorder, drop them down to 1 track, and then do more tracks.
Yeah, and it's
just having to keep adding to it.
It's this hugely obsessive thing. And I don't know if that's the actual album. I think that's the way he maybe demoed it.
Okay.
I want to say, but still, like the way that he constructed it, and it's just meticulous. And it was also the first hit record on Virgin Records, which is like everything from the Sex Pistols to what, Seal? I don't know, whatever. Who's ever on Virgin Records now, just like is completely dependent on that record.
And it was like a hit album in the UK, right?
It was huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But and then like every time there's some sort of new advancement in recording technology, he's re-recorded the whole thing.
He's done it like
because
4
he
or 5
wants to
times.
he wants to get a recording what he hears in his head,
And I don't think
he's
he
never
ever
been
will.
able to do it.
No.
He keeps re-recording Tubular Bells.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
He's never going to get it just perfect because it's too perfect in his head.
Yeah.
But it's really fascinating to hear how that tiny little 5/4 riff.
It's just the very beginning of the song.
Yeah,
It goes in so many bizarre directions that you would not associate with horror or a horror film. Yeah.
No, it's just like a weird, like cool proggy record.
Yeah.
And then it gets so indelibly connected with The Exorcist in the U.S. And otherwise, it's pretty standard 70s horror movie, Penderecki and.
Well, there's very little music,
There's
which
not
I
much.
like, and that's another thing. When people hear it's the scariest movie of all time, people have an idea in their mind of what a scary movie is, or what a horror movie is, and what like a horror score is. And there's so little music in this. It's very stark. There's one sequence in the movie that I guess you could say is a jump scare, which is when Ellen Burstyn's looking through the attic with her candle.
Smells nice.
There's no musical sting. There's nothing. It's just natural sound, and the sound design in the movie is fantastic.
Oh,
it's
so good.
It's so layered,
And it's all kind of just subtly manipulated, where it's just like it's
Yeah.
all just a little unreal.
See the cross of the Lord. Begone, you hostile power.
Oh Lord, hear my prayer.
When Jim and I were talking about Bone Tomahawk, we were talking about the sound design in that movie and how it's very dry and very like crackly. And I feel like this movie's kind of the same way.
Yeah, and just they talk about in one of the documentaries how they hired the guy that worked on El Topo. And the classic that where where Reagan's head is turning the 360 degrees, it's just a fucking wallet, but it's that crackling, dry, cracking sound. It's perfect.
I do want to mention that scene because that's we keep talking about the realism of the movie. That's the one moment, and it's probably the most iconic thing in the movie. But that's the one thing that breaks the reality of the movie for me, just because. I mean, it's a striking image and it's bizarre, of course, but. In reality, if someone were to do that with their heads, regardless of if they're possessed by a demon, it would completely snap their neck.
Yeah, and for me, the one where it goes completely all the way around, it takes you out of the movie. The other scene where they have the dummy where it goes just a little too far, that's creepy as fuck.
She turned her head around.
It's not that bad. Did you see the part where she turns her head around?
Not yet. I'm not gonna see it either.
Maybe part of it is the casting too. Like Jason Miller had never been in a movie before, I don't think. Max von Sydow's not familiar to Americans, particularly at that point.
Yeah.
Linda Blair is obviously an unknown. Like your most famous person is probably Ellen Burstyn at that point.
Yeah, and she wasn't even their first choice. They wanted Jane Fonda, Audrey Hepburn, or
the third
Mrs.
one?
Robinson.
Anne Bancroft.
Anne Bancroft.
Audrey Hepburn would absolutely accept the role. She thought it was great, but she wanted to shoot it in Rome, which would have made it prohibitively expensive.
Yeah.
So they couldn't do that.
And Georgetown is so important
Obviously.
to the setting of the film.
Although I could really see Audrey Hepburn in that role.
Oh, yeah.
I think that would work really well. Anne Bancroft had just gotten pregnant, so they would have had to wait 9 months. They didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
And I believe Jane Fonda thought it was commercialized bullshit.
It was, capitalist pigs making this film or something.
Because Jane Fonda in the 70s, everybody. Starred in Barbarella, but don't worry about this capitalist pig bullshit.
Well, that was an art film, Barbarella.
Sure was.
And then Jason Miller, who's just so... There's one shot of him sitting in a chair in this movie. That is how I feel most of the time. He looks so like world weary and beat down by life.
Yeah, just racked with the guilt throughout the whole movie of just like he didn't do right by his mother somehow.
Yeah.
And he doesn't even really know how.
Yeah.
But it's just like that sense of it is just like, I fucked up.
Yeah.
It's just consistently within him.
But yeah, and then of course the demon using that against him later.
Yeah, and just sends Father Damien over the top.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you get your ending.
I know Blatty was very concerned that people would be under the assumption that the demon won. That the demon took over Karras's body and forced him to jump out the window and killed him.
That's another one. I'm just like, I can't see how you see that.
I can see how you could see that.
Yeah.
I don't, but I do love the ambiguity of it, where people could interpret it that way.
And that's maybe that's why I can't really see it, is because it's so key to me that good win.
Yeah.
It's just like if evil wins in the end, it's just like, well, what the fuck?
What's the point?
Yeah.
The world's just shitty.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, then that's that whole scene between Max von Sydow and Jason Miller on the stairs, anyway.
Yeah.
It's like, well, we're supposed to feel despair, and like if evil wins, we fucking feel despair.
Yeah. And then the director's cut, the version, whatever you want to call it, where you have Kinderman and Father Dyer walking away, kind of rejuvenating that relationship that he had with Father Karras, which is a nice moment, and it also leads into Exorcist 3.
Yes.
Because those characters, different actors, but those characters are in Exorcist 3. And obviously, by today's standards, the movie's almost 50 years old. A lot of it is relatively tame.
All right.
The pacing is different than a modern movie.
And if you can't stand the tempo's not for you, that's fine. There's other movies you can watch.
Yeah.
It's okay, but you're missing out.
I don't want to pull if you don't like this, then you probably like The Conjuring 3 or whatever.
I don't know. Is Conjuring 3 any good?
It doesn't exist yet.
Oh, it might be good.
Again, when you hear the scariest movie of all time, I think a lot of people, when they think of horror movies, that's what they think of is, scary music, a lot of jump scares, things like that. And this is like the polar opposite.
Well, that's absolutely the thing, because again, like it had that reputation. Like when I was in my 20s when I saw it for the first time, I had been growing up on Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th and slasher movies and
the
gore.
more fantastical stuff.
Yeah. It's just different. It's not worse or better.
Yeah.
Depending on how you look at it, I think it's better, but it's just different.
I think the fact that it just all feels so real to me is what makes the horrific elements much more upsetting.
Yeah, it's so matter of fact.
Yeah.
Just this is what people would act like if this was really happening.
Mm-hmm.
Simple as that.
You call this a tip, you cheap bastard?